Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki jai, Gaunitai ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we're reading from Canto 10, chapter 55, and the text is 3 and 4. So we'll chant text 3 together. Tam sambara kama rupi pitva lokam anirdasham savidit vatmanaha satrum prasyodananvati apadgriham tam sambara karma rupi pitva tokam anirdasham savidit yat vatmanaha satrum prasyodanvati agadgriham tam sambara kama rupi pitva tokam anirdasham savidit vatmanaha satrum prasyodanvati agadgriham. Please chant. Tam sambara kama rupi pitva tokam anirdasham savidit vatmanaha satrum prasyodanvati agadgriham. Tam sambara kama rupi pitva lokam anirdasham savidit vatmanaha satrum prasyodanvati agadgriham. Tam sambara kama rupi pitva tokam anirdasham savidit vatmanaha satrum prasyodanvati agadgriham. Tam sambara kama rupi pitva tokam anirdasham savidit vatmanaha satrum prasyodanvati agadgriham. So let's read the word. Tam, him, sambara, the demon Sambara, Kama, as he desired, Rupi, assuming forms, Pitva, stealing, Tokam, the child, Anidasham, not yet 10 days old, Saha, he, Sambara, Viditva, recognizing, Atmanaha, his own, Satrum, enemy, Kasya, throwing, Vidit's gun, sorry, the light, Udanvati, into the sea. Agat went, Griham to his home. And the translation for text 3 is as follows. The demon Sambara, who could assume any form he desired, kidnapped the infant before he was even 10 days old. Understanding Pradyumna to be his enemy, Sambara threw him into the sea and then returned home. Here's a one-line purport by the BBC. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti points out that according to the Vishnu Purana, Pradyumna was kidnapped on the 6th day after his birth. And then text 4. Tamnir Jagara Balavan Minaha Sopi Aparai Saha Vita Jalena Mahata Grihito Matsya Jivibihi. And the translation for text 4 is as follows. A powerful fish swallowed Pradyumna, and this fish, along with others, was caught in a huge net and seized by fishermen. Om Gyana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurin Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svam Rupakadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakha Vitam Cha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyas Cha Kripa Sindhubhyeva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Ramapada Swami Iti Namine. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakti Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I'm going to begin by looking at the narration of this section as narrated in Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead by Srila Prabhupada. So this is Srila Prabhupada writing. There was a demon of the name Sambara who was destined to be killed by Pradyumna. The Sambara demon knew of his destiny, and as soon as he learned that Pradyumna had been born, he took the shape of a woman and kidnapped the baby from the maternity home less than 10 days after his birth. The demon took him and threw him directly into the sea. But, as it is said, quote, whoever is protected by Krishna, no one can kill. And whoever is destined to be killed by Krishna, no one can protect. Close quote. That's Srila Prabhupada writing, this little section that we're reading today. And in a similar way, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his commentary, he states, and this is him commenting, Sambara stole the infant before he was 10 days old. The Vishnu Purana says Pradyumna was kidnapped 6 days after his birth. Sambara understood Kamadev was his enemy, that was Vidya Atmanaha Satram, because he learned from Narada that Kamadev would kill him in the future. So, very similar commentaries, and it's interesting because in the verse, the mention was made, the demon Sambara who could assume any form he desired. So it emerges from the writing of Srila Prabhupada that he took the shape of a woman going into the maternity home in order to steal the infant Vidumya who'd been born from Rukmini. So if one pauses for a moment and considers the category of demoniac entities, because that's how we introduced to him, the demon Sambara. So one considers there's actually two categories of beings, or created beings. And so quoting from Bhagavad Gita 16:6, one is called the divine and the other demoniac. This is stated by Lord Krishna himself. So then one can consider the distinction between the two. That distinction is made by Srila Prabhupada in the purport to the same text in Bhagavad Gita 16:6. He says this: those who are born with divine qualities follow a regulated life. That is to say, they abide by the injunctions in scripture and by the authorities, close quote. Continuing, one who does not follow the regulative principles as they are laid down in the scriptures and who acts according to his whims is called demoniac or asuric. So there's no other criterion but obedience to the regulative principles of scripture. So that's a criterion that distinguishes the two categories of created beings, whether there's obedience to the regulative scriptures or whether there isn't obedience to the regulative scriptures. So, of course, one can add in parentheses that this applies to whereby duties are performed. So duties are performed taking regulative scriptural injunctions into account. So here's an example of Sambara, the Sambara demon, and his functioning. He took the shape of a woman and kidnapped the baby from the maternity home less than 10 days after his birth. So it's interesting, even, of course, not unsurprisingly, but on Christmas Day there was a report in the news that there was a car that was stolen in Ohio. And that car had been left running while the mother ran into some pizza parlor to get a pizza. And when she returned, the car got stolen. But the interesting thing was that she had left twins in the back of the car. So these little babies, very small, doesn't give the age, but they were photographs, small babies. And a day later, one of the twins was found. It wasn't mentioned where the twin was found, but there was still one twin missing. And so two police officers, they spent the whole day, roaming everywhere, looking for the stolen car. And they were in Indianapolis, so quite far from where the car had originally been stolen, but they were, I guess, following leads and continuing to search for this car. And they stopped to sit down somewhere to eat, and they were discussing. One of the police officers was saying, I'm a parent, and it would drive me crazy not knowing where my child is at. If they're safe, if they're okay, if they're alive. And then this is the police officer speaking. He said, and then God opened up the heavens to us and almost took him and put him right in our hands, because he looked up and suddenly he saw the stolen car like across the parking lot from where they were eating. So inside the car was the second of the twins. And in fact, their child had been alone for more than 2 days without anything to eat or drink. So now, interestingly, if one looks at this demoniac mentality and something of this behavior that's we're getting exposed to here by somebody who's called immediately a demon Sambara, the stealing of a baby, before the baby's 6 days old, taking a deceptive appearance in order to be able to do it. And even reading in the present time, somebody actually proceeding to feel comfortable to take a car with twins, babies in the back, and steal it and then drive into a different state and then just abandon the car with the baby or one of the babies. One of the babies obviously was taken out, but one of the babies was just left abandoned there. So it's interesting because the example of this demoniac mentality in the extreme is King Kamsa. So, this thing of not adhering to any scriptural injunction. So we had covered this part, but it's interesting because it comes up in relation to children and, harming children. King Kamsa describes his plans to Akura in relation to two young boys, Krishna and Balaram, and his broader plan, which includes Sambara, the same demon we're reading about here. So he's talking to Akura, and this is what Kamsa says. Now, my plan is to kill these two young boys. As soon as they come in the gate, there will be a giant elephant named Kuvalyapida waiting, and possibly he will be able to kill them. But if somehow or other they escape, they will next meet the wrestlers and will be killed by them. That is my plan. Very comfortable. No problem killing young boys. He goes on to describe other persons he will kill. So King Kamsa, then narrates how he's going to kill Nanda and Vasudev. He's going to kill his own father, Ugrasena, and all because he feels that they're not in line with the way he does his politics. So then this is what he says, and it captures this interesting criterion that just isn't met by somebody with the demoniac mentality of abiding by scriptural injunctions. This is what he says. Thus I shall get rid of all my enemies. Jarasandha is my father-in-law, and I have a great monkey friend named Dravida. With their help, it will be very easy to kill all the kings on the surface of the earth who support the demigods. That is my plan. In this way, I shall be free from all opposition, and it will be very pleasant to rule the world without any opposition. So super demoniac mentality. And he carries on. You may know also that Sambara, our person that we're coming across here, Narakasura and Banasura are my intimate friends, and when I begin this war against the kings who support the demigods, they will help me considerably. Surely I shall be rid of all my enemies. Please go to Vrindavan and encourage the boys to come here to see the beauty of Mathura and take pleasure in the wrestling competition. So he had a whole plan. So that's painting a picture of this demoniac mentality, no qualms about making a whole plan to kill two very tender-aged young boys. All again with that deception that's there. The deception is, telling his minister, bring them here, encourage them to see the beauty of Mathura. They're going to engage in a wrestling match. How exciting for young boys. But there's the underlying plan that it's all set up to kill them, Krishna and Balaram. Now, in objective psychology, there's this idea that the intelligence of the individual has to be, one wants to look at how it's exercised and how one can improve the intelligence of an individual. So that's generally in objective psychology. So there's an attempt to correlate an experience of the individual with the situation under which it arises. So, behavioral psychology looks at things that way. So to generalize, one can say that psychologists, at least, with a behavioral leaning, they want to know the conditions under which an experience happens. So the interest is in finding some general laws, that there can be some correlation between, behavior and conditions under which the behavior happens. So then, you can make some general law. So Looking from the spiritual standpoint, the condition for persons in general is that they are embodied. That's a general condition from the spiritual standpoint. And in the Bhagavatam, there's the sage Dadichi, and he says this: if one is unhappy to see the distress of other living beings and happy to see their happiness, his religious principles are appreciated as imperishable by exalted persons who are considered pious and benevolent. So there's the very brilliantly put explanation of how you can understand the divine mentality, the particular, even if the condition is that one is embodied, what the general behavior needs to be in order to be abiding by that criterion, that you're adhering to scriptural injunctions. And this is how it's put. You actually have to feel unhappiness when you see the distress of others, or you can feel happiness at the happiness of others. So that's the divine category of beings and their particular behavior in situations where one is observing others. And just backtracking a minute, when the woman was arrested, for having abandoned these babies and stealing the car, the interesting thing was that what she was going to be tried for was the fact that she had taken a baby across state lines. It was, a little infant being taken away a big distance, and we hearing that the Sambara demon, he's stolen a baby and he's thrown the baby into the sea to die. So, so clearly there's very little connection between the happiness, the distress, one can say, of the other individual on the part of the demoniac mentality person, because the behavior that is clearly one that there's no regard for the happiness or the distress of the other individual. And that quote that I was telling you of, Dadichi Muni, comes from the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the 10th chapter and the 9th verse. So in fact, one needs to feel the happiness and distress of others as his own. And the reasoning is as follows. We feel pain when someone disturbs us, and therefore we should not inflict pain upon other living entities. I mean, that's how you learn. That you observe in a particular situation, you experience pain when somebody's inflicting something upon you with certain circumstances. So therefore, you are conscious also that you don't inflict pain upon other living entities. So the conditions in the current scenario are such that there's the possibility of a future death at the hands of the baby. So that's what's happening. That's the conditions that are being considered from the demoniac standpoint of Sambara. So that condition is such that if we analyze it, material bodies themselves are perishable in due course of time. But the soul is eternal. So to correlate this with the experience of the individual, one must remember always that the body is like a dress. Therefore, the experience under the situation is, why lament the change of a dress? So the general law then becomes, the material body has no factual existence in relation to the eternal soul. Whether one believes in the existence of the soul or one doesn't believe in the existence of the soul, there's no cause for lamentation for the loss of the body. And Lord Krishna presents this argument. He puts it this way. So really actually bringing it to a kind of very broad analysis. He puts it this way. All created beings are unmanifested in the beginning, manifest in the interim state, and unmanifest again after annihilation. So what need is there for lamentation? So that's Bhagavad Gita 2:28. So it means that the material elements, they remain unmanifest before creation. And from the subtle state of unmanifestation comes manifestation, just as from ether, air is generated, and then from air, fire is generated, and from fire, water is generated, and from water, earth is generated. And from earth, then many things come, bodies, skyscrapers, cars. Yeah. So Dadichi Muni, he explains the consequence of this correlation between the experience of the individual and the conditions that exist. He puts it this way: the body, which is eatable by jackals and dogs after death, does not actually do any good for one. The spirit soul, it is usable only for a short time and may perish at any moment. The body and its possessions, its riches and relatives must all be engaged for the benefit of others, or else they will be sources of tribulation and misery. So again, that's Bhagavatam 6:10-10. So of course, the helping of others has to be in light of the ultimate goal of life. So it's not merely that you help others in a vacuous state. It's very consciously, one is aware that one's performing those helpful actions in order to please the Supreme Lord. So even our pious police officers in Indianapolis, they actually saw God in the picture when they found that stolen car. The expression was, the heavens were opened up to us and the baby was literally put in our hands, because they were meditating all day on finding this car and being so concerned that there was some poor suffering little baby that the parent, in fact, was suffering about, not knowing where the baby was. So any philanthropic or humanitarian activity has to be directed towards achieving the ultimate goal of life, which is pleasing the Supreme Lord. And this allows for the activity to be perfect. Yeah. And this police officer was commenting, I found it very interesting because obviously there was a religious undertone in everything. He was commenting that just to have this experience that appeared to him obviously as divine intervention, he said that that was why he put on his uniform every day, just in the hope of something so wonderful happening. So, so of course, any activity where one's helping someone it becomes perfect, where there's the thought of pleasing the Supreme Lord. So returning to the action of one who's in the demoniac category of creative beings, and therefore someone who doesn't know what to do or what's to be done and what's not to be done, means they're not following any scriptural rules, and this action of Sambhara, of taking or kidnapping a baby and throwing that baby into the sea, it has a new action that comes about. And Srila Prabhupada writes again in Krishna book, when Pradyumna was thrown into the sea, a big fish immediately swallowed him. Later, that fish was caught in the net of a fisherman, and the fish was later sold to the Sambhara demon. So see the irony. So there's the demoniac mentality. There's no faith in, no inclination to follow any scriptural rules. And here's the Sambhara demon. He performs an action that's going to make it inevitable, his death. And that's precisely what he was trying to avoid. He was going to kill this baby, 6 days old, kidnapped, went to all this trouble, kidnapped, assumed the form of a woman, threw the baby into the sea. And what happens? The baby arrives right in his home, in the belly of the fish. Yeah. So, in fact, his death becomes inevitable. Apart from, of course, the consideration of the temporary nature of the body, that that was discussed earlier on. So Srila Prabhupada gives some generalizations. He puts it this way. The demons, therefore, do not accept any instruction which is good for society. And because they do not follow the experience of great sages and the rules and regulations laid down by great sages, the social condition of the demoniac people is very miserable. So it means generally those who are functioning in that kind of demoniac mentality, when you examine the overall nature of the society in which they're living, it's actually pretty awful. There's, even this thing, like just using that example again of the kidnapped twins that, was in our neighboring state. It's a pretty terrible condition. When the woman got out of the car and left this baby that the car she'd stolen and driven all the way to Indianapolis, she got out of the car, went into one of the retail stores, one of these food selling stores, to ask for a job. and then the person who had interviewed her just saw her walk past the car, not even looking at the car, and went on her way. So she just heartlessly abandoned this infant after, looking how she was going to, I guess, do something that's normal in society, get a job. That is an indication of, how terrible social conditions are, where there's this no following of any kind of scriptural rules. There's this heartlessness. So Srila Prabhupada says, so the social condition of demoniac people is very miserable. And Srila Baladev Vijayabhusan, in commenting on Bhagavad Gita 16.7, he says, they do not have internal or external cleanliness necessary for following Vedic injunctions. They do not have conduct according to the rules stated by Manu and others in scripture. They do not speak the truth, satyam, words, which state the facts as they are and which will benefit other living entities. Their teachings are like the sound of jackals and vultures. So, of course, he's taken it on a much broader level. This woman didn't even give information about where that baby was. When they arrested her, she didn't even give information about where the baby in that car was. Completely heartless. So this idea that they don't speak, they can't state the facts as they are, and they can't act for the benefit of other living entities. I'm using a microscopic example, but, it's in line with the discussion of this kind of demoniac mentality. So Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he explains the experience for Pradumya and the conditions of the situation by saying, Pradumya was swallowed by a powerful fish, Balavan Minaha. This was done by the desire of the Lord, who likes to perform a variety of pastimes. It was not that the fish was stronger than Pradumya. So it's more in line with the interesting pastime of just highlighting how this demon could not escape his death. He did all the actions, the heartless actions that would allow him to free himself from what was to be his destiny, to be killed by Pradumya, but his very action brought Pradumya right into his home. Anyway, those are some thoughts on these two verses from today. If there's anything to add to the discussion. Okay, it's very clear and simple. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.